Good evening, everyone. I'm Natalie DiNicola, and on behalf of the Danforth Leadership Council, welcome to Seeds of Change 2025. Thank you for being here with us tonight as we explore together the future of food security. But first, we're grateful to our media sponsor, HEC Media, who is live streaming tonight's presentation. You will be able to watch the broadcast on HEC TV next month and like and share it online. Since 2010, Seeds of Change has brought renowned leaders to the Danforth Center to inspire and unite the audience for positive change. Typical programs energize us with inspirational stories, daring us to dream big and to tackle big problems. Tonight is no different. We are honored to welcome our featured guest, Dr. Cary Fowler, a pioneer in global food security whose visionary leadership helped create the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, often called the Doomsday Vault, for its role in safeguarding the world's crop diversity. Dr. Fowler served recently as the U.S. Special Envoy for Global Food Security at the U.S. State Department. And in July, he was named president of a new organization, the Food Security Leadership Council, formed when more than 25 bipartisan leaders came together to reimagine the U.S. approach to solving global food security. He is the 2024 laureate of the World Food Prize, often referred to as the Nobel Prize of Food Production. Tonight, Dr. Fowler will share stories and insights from his remarkable career, followed by a conversation with one of St. Louis's most thoughtful journalists, Sarah Fenske, executive editor of St. Louis Magazine. We're grateful to Sarah for joining us tonight. As someone who has spent my career at the intersection of agriculture and sustainability, I support the Danforth Center because I believe in its mission to improve the human condition through plant science. Ensuring food security around the world requires research, innovation, and collaboration that is happening right here at the Danforth Center. If you'd like to explore more or support the work, there's a QR code on the back of your program. Thank you again for joining us tonight. I hope you'll find this evening both inspiring and thought-provoking. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the stage over to Dr. Cary Fowler.
Thank you, Natalie, and gosh, thank all of you for coming out. This is a huge crowd, and I understand there's a little bit of an overflow crowd in some other rooms as well. So, I've had 2 days here now at the Danforth Center, and I must say I'm so impressed by the people here and by the quality of the research. Just astonishing. But there's something that impresses me even more, and that's actually the quality of the questions that are being asked here, the subjects that the people have decided to work on here. I can't recall another institute like this in the world that really from top to bottom is asking such important questions. So my hat's off to you. I'm a big fan now. So what I want to do tonight is I'm going to discuss my 3 a.m. worries, what keeps me up late at night and what I think about when I wake up in the middle of the night. And that's really to look at some of the headwinds that face agricultural production and food security. And then I want to look very briefly at 3 different initiatives that I've been involved with that I think address some of these issues in a systemic way and in a long-term way. Now let's see if the technology, yeah. And I will end up taking you on a little tour of this facility near the North Pole. So the first thing that I think of at 3 a.m. when I wake up is the general situation with food security in the world. We've got 750 million people who are food insecure, and that means that they don't have access to sufficient food to meet basic human needs. There are 3 billion people on Earth that cannot afford a nutritious diet. In many cases, it would be twice as much money as they have. And the part that really hurts me in my heart is 150 million children 5 years and under who are physically and cognitively stunted because of malnutrition. That situation of being physically and cognitively stunted is a permanent situation that will be with them their entire lives. So you have countries out there where 35, 40% of the children are cognitively and physically stunted. And I ask you, how can a country in that situation ever hope to be peaceful and to develop itself if a third of the population is in this situation? So we have in the world today both a food and a nutrition problem. Not just calories, but also nutrition. And that's the starting point. The preponderance of scientific evidence is that we are not on track to meet either food demand or food need by 2050. In fact, we are far, far short of that goal. And in that context, what I want to do tonight is talk to you really quickly about 6 of the headwinds that I think face agricultural production today. Here they are. And I want to say just a quick word about each one of them, starting with climate. Last month, July, was the 558th consecutive month in which the global average temperature for the month exceeded the 20th century average for that month. 558 consecutive, above average, if you will, months. What we're headed towards, and we're part of the way there already, is that the best cropping years, agricultural years of the future will be hotter than the hottest of the past. So imagine that. In the past, we've had some pretty hot weather and bad harvest because of that. In the future, some of those years are going to look like good years. To bring that down to a point, in Africa, where the greatest need exists, we should be producing 50 to 70% more food by mid-century. Actually, that's a global average. Globally, we need to be doing that. In Africa, probably even more than 50 to 70% more food. Now, in sub-Saharan Africa, one of the major staple crops is maize, corn. What are the projections for maize productivity for Africa by mid-century? Minus 13%. The difference between minus 13% and plus 70% is a big difference. It means that children are going to starve to death, and we're going to watch it happen on TV. So, as bad as this might seem, those projections don't take into account some of the other headwinds on the screen here. So I'm just going to run through those real quickly. I'm sorry, this is the bad news portion of this lecture. Something else is coming at the end, I promise. Soil. The African Union estimates that by mid-century, perhaps as much as 50% of the soil, the cropland in Africa, will be, using their term, unusable. That's going to have an impact on crop production. Water. Agriculture takes 70% of fresh water supplies. Globally, it takes about 80% in the United States. And if you look at the major aquifers around the world, 21 of 37 major aquifers are in a state of being depleted faster than they're being replenished. So if you need to produce more food, you usually need to put more water on the crops. We're not going to have that from most of the aquifers. And in fact, there was an article, this really scared me, in Science, the journal Science, in March, that talked about a permanent hydrological regime change. Now let me put that in simple English for you. What they're saying is they're measuring transfer of soil moisture through evaporation to the oceans. So great has been that transfer, it exceeds the amount of water that's being lost from the melting of the Greenland glaciers. That's a lot of water. But so great has that transfer been from land to ocean that it has created a measurable effect on the rotation of the Earth on its axis. That should be a wake-up call. Conflict. Historically, and when I say historically, I'm going back to ancient Egypt, ancient China, Mesopotamia, there is a direct correlation between conflict and food insecurity, and it goes both ways. Food insecurity causes conflict, conflict causes food insecurity. We need to break that cycle. If you think back recently, you could think back to Arab Spring. Arab Spring took place in a particularly hot time of period for the Mideast. Lower food production, higher cost. People got more than hot and bothered. This connection is very strong. Trade. Trade helps smooth things out. If you have a bad production year in a country, you can import food. And so what we really need are trade regulations that don't discourage food flowing when it needs to flow, which is usually in those bad situations. But guess what happens when we have a food crisis globally? Food exporting countries, I'm not talking about the United States, we don't do this, but food exporting countries around the world tend to stick on export bans. And why do they do that? Because food prices are rising there in those countries as well, and they want to satisfy the domestic political demand by making a show of keeping the rice or whatever the crop is in country to lower the prices. But what's the effect of that? The effect of that goes downstream to some of the poorest countries in the world where people basically are priced out of the market for food. So we need to be careful about food. Finally, I want to say something about research and development. This is really what has made our country great. It's our agricultural expertise. We're second to none in the world. But we have had bipartisan benign neglect in terms of our agricultural research budgets. On an inflation-adjusted basis, we spend in public expenditures on agricultural research what we were spending 50 years ago. Inflation adjusted, same amount of money. And since 2002, our public sector agricultural research has taken a hit of about 30%. In 1980, China had 0.8% of global expenditures in public sector agricultural research. 0.8%. They are now 25%. And we have slipped into second place quite substantially. They are now getting more patents than we are getting in agricultural fields. I don't begrudge China engaging in agricultural research. I think we do better agricultural research here, and I think it's better for the world that we do it, because I think we're more generous. And the most interesting thing about agricultural research is the return on investment in agricultural research. Even agricultural research that the U.S. government has done that's aimed towards helping people abroad has a 10-to-1 benefit for U.S. farmers. And if you take the entire economic calculation, usually about 30-to-1. This is one of the few things we can do in government that basically turns a profit, if you will. It's a great, great investment. Enough said. I think we know that the research budgets are being challenged, and I think that we, in a bipartisan manner, ought to increase those budgets quite quite substantially because of the good they do in the world. I think it's consistent with both American values and American interest. So to summarize, we have a historic combination of challenges facing agriculture. Now, any one of those challenges would be quite daunting. But I don't think we've ever seen anything quite like this going back through the entire history of agriculture, going back to Neolithic days 12,000 years ago. This is really something new. So it's not just one or two of these challenges, it's the combination of these challenges. And we, to our own peril, ignore what the combination is going to do and not prepare for it. Now, I know that some of the data I've given you is probably wrong. Some of the projections I've thrown out probably not going to be exactly what comes to pass. We can debate whether the climate or water or soils or conflict or R&D, we can debate whether those things are a tiny problem or they're a huge problem. Fine to have that discussion. But one thing I think we can agree on, and that is that the trends associated with all these all need to be sharply positive, and they're not. They're not sharply positive. We can debate how negative they are, but they're not sharply positive, and that's what we need if we want to live in a food secure and I think peaceful world, because without food security, we're going to be seeing, I think, a lot more conflict. So that's the context in which we all work, no matter what you do. So I want to show you three things that I think are interesting, and they're interesting for me because I was involved with all of them, and I speak from some personal experience. The first one was something we did at the State Department the last couple of years. It's called the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils, and we simply focused our attention on some of the indigenous and traditional crops in Africa that are highly nutritious and also are growing well in the increasingly hot climates there. Why did we want to focus on those? Well, because they're highly nutritious and because they haven't been worked on in the past. And so the return on investment, the bang for the buck, if you will, is fantastic. There's a huge amount of potential in these, what we call opportunity crops. They're crops like fonio, which has 10 times the iron of maize, African eggplant, spider plant, grass pea, okra, you know that one. And then three crops that are being worked on right here at the Danforth Center, cassava, teff, and cowpea. All of them have tremendous opportunities, and there's been absolutely world-class research that's gone on right here in those crops, making a huge difference in the world. The second thing was sort of the last thing I did with government. I was looking at these trends and saying, frankly, you know, almost no matter what, we're still going to run into trouble. We're expecting a lot of good incremental gains in agricultural productivity, but we still need some big breakthroughs, some transformational breakthroughs in agriculture. So we assembled a group of Nobel laureates and World Food Prize laureates. We drafted a 2-page open letter to anybody that wanted to read it. And we basically said agriculture faces a lot of headwinds. We need to do something about it, and we need essentially agricultural moonshots. You know where the term moonshots come from? It comes from John Kennedy saying, I'm going to send a man to the moon and bring them back. Well, we need that type of big thinking in agriculture. What is it? Well, it could be nitrogen-fixing cereals. It could be perennial grains. Some of that work is going on here at the Land Institute in Kansas. It could be improvements in photosynthesis. It could be improvements in plant architecture and root architecture. These are things that would make transformational increases in agricultural production. Not 1 or 2%, 30%. That kind of change. And that's exactly what we need. To my shock, we drafted this letter, a small group of Nobel laureates and myself, And we sent it to other Nobel laureates to see if they might want to endorse the statement. 128 Nobel laureates endorsed the statement, and 26 World Food Prize laureates. Has never happened before. So we hope that that, of course, gets some attention. Finally, I think all of these, everything I've said today, really points to the necessity of getting the basics right. We've got to mind the fundamentals. We have to get the fundamentals of food production and food security right. What are those? Well, it's crop adaptation to whether it's the climate or the soil or the new pest or disease. It's work on soil, it's work on water, and it's work on American leadership. Those are the fundamentals of food security in this world. I think personally that nothing is much more basic to agriculture than diversity, the diversity of our agricultural crops, because that's the biological foundation of agriculture. Without diversity in agriculture, you have no adaptation, you have no improvement, you have no food security. And that's what I've spent my whole life working on. So I'm going to give you a little tour. We're going to dive a little bit more deeply into that subject of crop diversity. Here's a picture of, I think, about 40 different kinds of beans. Now, if I wanted to show you all of the diversity in beans, and I wanted slides like this with about 40 beans on them each, I would have to show you about 1,000 slides. We don't have time for that. There's a lot of diversity, and that diversity is the raw material for plant breeding. That's the raw material for the improvement of crops. The diversity is, here's another, this comes courtesy of my wife, who wrote a book about squashes and pumpkins. And these are portraits, I would say, of different squashes and pumpkins. There are thousands of them. We don't have time for that either. But you get the idea. That diversity in our agricultural crops has historically been collected and it's been stored, conserved in seed banks. That's a fancy word for a freezer. If you want to conserve seed for the long time, you dry it to reduce the biological activity inside, and then you freeze it. So here's a picture of a seed bank. This one was at an international facility outside of Aleppo, Syria. Bad things happen to buildings. And they happen in many cases in countries that have bad things happening. So during the civil war in Syria, that facility was taken over by rebels, and the gene bank was raided. And they, it was basically destroyed. I'm going to come back to that story in just a second. The question for us is, why would we care? Who cares? Why do we care what happens in this facility outside of Aleppo? Or in the Philippines, where they had a big flood where the water came up to about this level in the gene bank, and then after the flood they had a fire. Why would we care? Here's the reason. It's the only technical chart I'm going to show you today. And all you need to know is, all you need to look at are the numbers here, and you'll see that all the numbers are small. And the numbers represent what percentage of the global collections of these crops are held by those countries. And you see them all are small. And what does that mean? It means that no country on earth, including the United States, is independent in terms of the genetic diversity it needs to support its own agricultural system. We are all dependent. We are all interdependent. What happens in Aleppo, Syria, or in the Philippines really matters to us. So what did we want to do about that? We wanted to, a few years back, say, well, it's not good enough that we're losing some of that diversity. When you lose that diversity, you lose it forever. It's gone like the dinosaurs are gone. And if it has an important trait for disease resistance, it's gone for humanity. So we wanted to put a duplicate copy of all that diversity in the seed banks in a really safe place. And we decided to go there where the arrow is pointing. That's really close to the North Pole. If you go down south of there, you'll see the northern tip of Norway. If you're in Rome, Italy, and you fly to Oslo, Norway, you're about halfway there. When you fly in, looks a bit like this. It's this incredibly beautiful landscape. That's a glacier, by the way, that's about 100 meters tall. Doesn't look that big on that photograph, but that's what it is. There's a small village there with about 2,000 people. There are more polar bears than there are people. And what we wanted to do was build a facility inside the mountain where it's naturally cold, and we wanted to take collections, including from the United States, to safely take care of them there. So this was our idea of what we would do. We would build a facility in the coldest part of the mountain. It's about 100 and something meters inside the mountain and 3 rooms, and that was the idea. This is what it looks like under construction, give you a sense of scale. And here we are on the outside afterwards. And then wintertime. This facility was paid for by Norway. We store seeds from all around the world free of charge. There are now 1,345,000 samples in this facility. Each sample about 500 seeds. It's the biggest collection of biodiversity on Earth. It is the biological foundation of agriculture. When you walk through the door, you're looking at a tunnel going to the coldest part of the mountain. And when you get to the end of that tunnel, you will see a door, and you know that something is happening there. When you open that door, you see the seeds. It's pretty simple. We freeze seeds, and they can last a long time and be quite happy there. We have seeds from North Korea, South Korea. They're getting along. Seeds from Ukraine and Russia. They're getting along. And here is where I come back to Aleppo, Syria. These are the worst boxes in the seed vault. We got that collection that I showed you the picture of the seed bank in Aleppo, Syria. We got that collection out 2 weeks before all hell broke loose in Syria. And that's why the boxes aren't so nice. But we saved that collection, and it's a collection of wheat and barley and lentils and chickpeas and grass pea and other crops that are particularly adept to growing in hot, dry climates, which is a lot of what we have these days. So that's why we've done what we've done. And I want to end with showing you something. You'll have to indulge me here. This is a video that I want to show you. I've made 25, 30 trips to Svalbard. I've lived up there for quite a while. I've fallen in love with it. I realize that there are reasons why you do the work you do in your life, and part of it comes from your head, and part of it comes from your heart. I've been talking about the head reasons for the last 20 or 30 minutes. I want to talk to you about the heart now. So I want to show you this video. It's a music video. It is in Norwegian. You will not understand it unless you speak Norwegian. But all you need to know is it's a love song to Svalbard. The film was made by a friend of mine. The music is composed by and sung by another friend of mine. And you will see a little piece of it, if you look closely, with the seed vault itself. And then there's a message at the end, which I think is important for all of us to hear and take to heart. So I hope you enjoy this.
bredbygd dekket av is. Du brøler storm og hvisker bris. Lille, store Svalbard, du mann. Du løfter og tar meg som ingen andre kan, for jeg vil lengte nord etter deg. Rop oss hjem og vis oss vei. Dans med oss, gi oss ditt sanne nakne jeg. I snøsludd, redsel, kuling og svart viser du muskler, holder meg hardt. Du har istapper i skjegget ditt, og du dunker stort og vilt i hjertet mitt, for jeg vil lengte nord etter deg. Rop oss hjem og vis oss vei. Dans med oss, gi oss ditt sanne nakne jeg, for jeg vil lengte nord dit vi bor. Rop oss hjem, bruk store ord, for jeg vil lengte nord dit vi bor. Kullsvart inn i vårhvit utenpå, men vakrest i natt og vinterblå. Du er alt jeg vil ha i en boble av tid. Min lyst, din himmel uendelig vid, for jeg vil lengte nord etter deg. Rop oss hjem og vis oss vei. Dans med oss, gi oss ditt sanne nakne jeg, for ja, jeg lengter nord etter deg. Rop meg hjem og vis meg vei. Dans med meg, gi meg ditt sanne nakne jeg.
Dr. Fowler, thank you so much for that presentation. That was really sobering. It was very beautiful at the end, and I think it all gave us so much to think about. I found myself thinking about a profile the New Yorker did of you when you were working on the Global Seed Vault, and they compared you to Noah. And they did that, of course, because you were stockpiling all these seeds for doomsday. But I found myself thinking of these headwinds that you're telling us about today. And I wonder if you also think of Noah in this context, that you're telling us it's going to start raining. And we're saying, oh, I don't see a sign of rain. Mm-hmm. It feels like no one is paying attention to these issues right now. Is that fair?
It's partially fair, yes. You know, if you know your Bible, Noah was 600 years old or something, and I'm getting there. I'm really feeling it. I think that we live in a short-term world, and we're not comfortable. We're hardwired to think about immediate threats. I tell people that, you know, if I reach out to hit you really fast, you'll duck. But if my fist is only moving at that speed, you're not going to do it. What is this? And so we typically don't think long term, and we also don't think about the combination of challenges. And that's what actually has really scared me, that those things come on top of each other. On the other hand, and I know that part of the presentation was probably depressing, and I must say I don't think it's my job to be professionally optimistic or pessimistic, either one. But I am actually more optimistic now than I used to be, because I think we actually know what to do in the global food security realm. We have technologies that I couldn't dream of 20 or 30 years ago, and we're doing things I couldn't imagine. We've made mistakes along the way, but hey, we've learned from those mistakes. So I think we're in a great position to lead, and I really do relate what we're doing to security, to peace and security in the world. I don't think we can, I don't think we're going to have the kind of world we all want to live in a peaceful world, if we have even more than 750 million people food insecure. I don't think we can insulate ourselves that well in this country or any other.
So you've seen countries come together and people come together across industries. The Global Seed Vault is a great example of that. What kind of leadership is going to be needed here to bring more urgency to this problem and to start putting some of these solutions in place? You say we know what these solutions are. Mm-hmm. So what kind of leadership will it take to get to a point where we're actually addressing them?
Well, I think there are different kinds of leadership, but the leadership I like comes from leadership of ideas. And I think if we do have good ideas that are practical ideas, it can be explained to normal people on Capitol Hill, everywhere, that I think there's a power to that. And some of the things that that I've been engaged in the past have caught people's imagination. I mean, when we worked on the Seed Vault, I can't tell you, I mean, that was a wild and crazy idea. Nobody had ever done that before. Putting seeds on the side of a mountain in the North Pole, that is crazy. Until it became real. Yeah. And then it was one of those moments where people said, well, why didn't I think of that before? And people came together, and now you can find children's books that are written about this, and there are documentary films and novels and all kinds of things. So, and we have seeds in the Seed Vault from 233 countries, including a bunch that don't exist anymore, I think. So I think ideas are powerful, and I think we have the right ideas now about global food security, and I'm pretty optimistic. What we have. My greatest trait, according to my parents, was that I was, well, they didn't call it a great trait, but they said I was stubborn. Persistent, you know? Yeah. And so I think we just need to be persistent in talking about this issue, and I think we can find common ground to move forward.
Do you think research institutions are doing enough to translate the knowledge that they have and their awareness of these issues into action?
No.
It's a simple answer here. Tell me, what do you think needs to change with how they interact with this issue?
It's not their fault. Their business is not public communications, and typically scientists are not great public communicators, and I think we're living through that era. So there's always room for improvement, but I do think they have a powerful story to tell. I've seen a couple of stories, Jim, this week, the last day or two, your work on cassava, some of the work on teff, some perennial crops work. These are great stories, and anybody can understand them.
And do you think, these crops that aren't necessarily the marquee crops that you see the Danforth Center working on, do you think there's more openness, more interest on the part of funders and people who could pursue the important, pay for the important research that's being done, now that we're seeing so many headwinds that we can't just rely on corn?
Yeah. I don't know. I hope so.
That maybe hasn't happened yet.
To some extent it has. One of the things that I was trying to do at the State Department with this program of looking at indigenous crops in Africa was we were trying to leverage what the United States could do. So yes, it was a little bit like the stone soup example, where somebody puts some stones in a kettle and invites other people. Oh, this would be great soup if we just had a carrot or two to put in it, and just an onion or two, and by the end of the day you've got stone soup. But we tried that, and we got 9 countries coming in saying, yeah, we like this idea. Let's work together on this. And quite a lot of money was put on the table. Basically what we did was crowdsource. We came through with the idea, and then we crowdsourced support from other countries to pay for it.
So we're now at a point where the U.S. government is not necessarily willing to pay up for things like that. How big of a problem is that for the situation you've outlined here?
It's a substantial problem. I saw, and my experience the last few years was that we are looked to as the leaders in this field. And hey, we deserve to be. We are the big players in this field. We're the best players in this field. And what we do in this really exemplifies American values and American interest. Pulling back causes our friends and allies to pull back as well. Mm-hmm. And it also undercuts our ability to be persuasive in a friendly way to get them more involved.
Yeah.
So I think they value our leadership, and we need to, I think that's where we need to be.
So can private funders, can philanthropists step up and fill that gap? Or does that have to be the U.S. government coming to the table to mobilize action from elsewhere?
I think other sources of funding, private philanthropies and such, are under a lot of pressure right now. So I think that it's a government role. Having said that, and the work I'm involved in doing now with the Food Security Leadership Council is to reimagine in a creative way what future leadership in global food security would look like for the United States. We are not going back in time. I do not believe that USAID, for example, will be reestablished. And internally, when I was in government, I was a bit of a critic of some of the things they were doing. Thought they could do better. I think we need to focus on what are the most essential, critical, impactful, high return on investment, leverage possibilities for the U.S. government. And I think that's what we can sell, and those are the essentials for food security. A lot of the headwinds that I've been talking with you about are only going to get worse if we don't do anything in the next 5 or 10 years. It's not like we can forestall the bill that's coming due. Mm-hmm. So I think we really need to focus on what the most essential things are. And if we get the fundamentals right, I'm feeling pretty good.
So what are those essential things?
Well, for instance, soil was one of them that I mentioned on the here. If you're a farmer in the United States and you've got a John Deere tractor or a combine or something, that's GPS linked, and you know the difference in your soil from here to here. Mm-hmm. And you might have a different seeding rate, and you might have a different fertilizer rate and irrigation, everything. In Africa, it's kilometer based. And no farm has kilometers. So you're dealing with a small holder that has 2 acres, and they don't know the kind of soil they've got. So they don't know what the mineral deficiencies are. And guess what? The government doesn't know either. So the government can't make rational decisions about where to promote agriculture and what crops to promote and where to give the subsidies and what kind of fertilizer to supply to the farmers. Well, imagine what goes wrong in a country in Africa if you don't get the soil situation right from the start. Mm-hmm. Nothing else good can happen after that. So what can we do? Well, we got satellites. They can map the soils, and we can model the soils. And we have cell phone apps that the USDA, by the way, has invented. And it can give feedback. So farmers, there are hundreds of millions of cell phones in Africa, believe it or not, and they can have this map. And they can feed information real time about what they're experiencing on their farm back up to the satellite to improve the model so they can become better business people in managing their farm, and the government can be more efficient in how they manage their affairs too. So that's that can be done.
That's a really hopeful example. So
yeah.
This is technology we have, yet without a profit motive or without the federal government willing to pay to put this all over Africa, how do we get to a point where then it's transforming the soil there too?
Well, I think, as in many areas in our economy that we've experienced here in the United States, there's a role for government to play at the front end. But I can tell you we're always looking for what the private sector angle could be. I've had discussions with ministers of agriculture who said, there's great technology out there, we know what to do, but we need to scale up for our country. And I would say, well, do you think the United States is capable of helping you scale up? And they would say, well, no, probably not. It's a big country, and there are a lot of countries in Africa. I'm just giving the example of Africa. I said, well, do you and your government have the capacity to scale up? No, not really. I said, well, that only leaves one other actor out there. That's the private sector. Yeah. So why don't we start talking about how we can, from the get-go, bring in the private sector, create an enabling environment so the private sector isn't scared to come in and they can recoup their investment and make a big business out of it. And why can't we put all those elements together? I think that's where the future lies.
I'm going to ask this question so hopefully. I'm just dying to know that the answer here is yes. Have you seen the private sector be able to step in and solve a problem like this when the government wasn't able to or wasn't willing to?
Well, there's some truly amazing things going on in the private sector. I should have given a shout out to some neighbors across the street at Bayer Crop Sciences. Bayer was the program that I mentioned, the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils, where we were working on indigenous crops in Africa. Our biggest corporate supporter was Bayer. And they devoted, thank you, Laura. And they didn't need to, but they supplied several $1 million worth of in-kind plant breeding. And what I'm hoping is that some of those breakthroughs from their plant breeding work will help some of these crops get to the next level where they really become, viable commodities for farmers. Here's what I'm scared about. If you have, in say sub-Saharan Africa, if maize, corn is going to take a hit to its productivity, which all of our models say it is, but you need to really ramp up the productivity of at least food crops for nutrition. Well, what's going to happen if we don't invest in some of these traditional crops, but at the same time, the current staple crops are going down in their yield? Well, farmers will continue to grow today's main staple crops, even as the yield declines. Why? Because the yield is still going to be higher than the yield of their traditional crops. So what we need to do is realize that we're in a situation where we have to help countries create more options for themselves. Not picking winners, creating options. And that's what I think we can use the help of Bayer and other companies, and I think they see that. And if they're successful, they will make a business out of it, and I hope they do.
I'm glad you brought it back to seeds, because so many people are so interested in the work you did with the Global Vault there. We had some great questions from our audience, and very few that we can get to tonight. But one of the ones that came out of the audience here, they asked, what are the biggest challenges in ensuring that seeds aren't just preserved the way you've been able to do, but also adapted to rapidly changing climate conditions?
Yeah. Well, conserving seed is pretty easy. As I mentioned, you dry them, you freeze them, and in the seed vault,
It's easy when you have a giant vault. So yeah,
Oh, yeah,
you've
yeah.
taken the hard part out of the way.
I mean, sooner or later, all the seeds will die, but the seed bank that supplied them has an interest in resupplying them when the germination rate falls. But get this, I mean, we have done experimental tests on how long some of those seeds will last, and for most of the grains, like rice and wheat, we're talking a couple of thousand years. For sorghum, the experimental result is 19,600 years. I'm not worried. You know, that's going to be okay. The real challenge is actually also a pretty easy one to solve. This is like a gigantic library of life. The problem is we don't always have a good card catalog for it. Yeah. So sometimes we have samples that have hidden traits in there, and it might be a trait for disease resistance that, and if you don't know it's in that particular sample, you're not going to be able to use it in your plant breeding program, and it's not going to get out to the American farmer. And there are a lot of really near misses of where we screened gigantic collections, thousands of samples, and found the gene or genes that we needed for resistance in, you know, 1 or 2 varieties at the end, bottom of the barrel, so to speak. So it's really simple to do more screening of these collections and more research so we know exactly what we've got. And that's such a, I mean, that's a huge cost-benefit ratio there to know what you have. I liken it to having an artist's palette. If an artist has a palette with a lot of colors, there are a lot of paintings that are possible. But if you start taking the colors away one by one, you can still make a painting, but your options are declining. And I think when we lose the diversity, we're losing those options. It's really like taking the colors off the palette. And it's so cheap and easy to save the seed long term and to investigate to see what the traits are. I mean, why would we not do that?
And are we doing that? I mean, are we doing enough of that right now?
Nobody in the world is doing enough.
Nobody's doing it. So, okay, here's yet another problem that urgently
Yeah.
needs to be solved. How do we go about that? What would you see as the key steps to making sure that we're able to actively integrate these kind of traits from these indigenous crops into what we have today?
Well, certainly we need to understand what's at stake. I had a kind of a hero in my field, a fellow named Jack Harlan, who was a professor at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. And he collected what he called was a hopelessly miserable variety of wheat in Turkey in 1948, I believe. It was bad. No farmer would want to grow it. It was susceptible to all kinds of diseases. But he stuck it in the seed bank, and some years later, some wheat diseases came up, and they decided to see, well, okay, this miserable kind of wheat here, it's pretty bad, but I wonder if it has a resistance to these new diseases. Well, it did. They used that variety of wheat in wheat breeding programs in the northern part of the United States and Northwest. It added $150 to $200 million in farmer productivity on an annual basis, and it's still going. Wow. That was from the 50s onward. Now, for maybe $300 million, you could, 400 million, I don't know, you could conserve all of the diversity of all the major crops. Now, if I went, and I have done this, I've gone to scientists in a room like this full of scientists, and I've said, what do you think the odds are that in the collections in our National Gene Bank, which is in Fort Collins, Colorado, by the way, that we could find one similar gene for resistance that would be that important for one major crop? Because if we could just find it for one, we could pay for the entire system. And you know what happens when I ask that question? What? People laugh. The scientists laugh. And, you know, you get these shouts from the audience saying, oh, Cary, one? We're going to find many. So
They're so confident.
yeah, so I think the cost-benefit ratio, again, should speak to what we're doing.
So does that go back to what we sort of began this conversation with, these ideas and the ability to communicate them, to help
Yeah.
people understand, here is what this huge payoff could be?
I think so, yeah.
So you've
So
traveled.
this session helps, by the way.
We're doing our part. You're
Yeah.
doing your part. So you've traveled all around the world talking about these issues,
Mm-hmm.
working on these issues. You've now spent some time here at the Danforth Center, and I'm
Yeah.
wondering what strikes you most as you look at the work that's being done here.
Well, I said it when I got up, actually. The reason I wanted to come and be with you tonight was a bit selfish. I wanted actually to tour around the Danforth Center. This was my ticket to do that.
I think there's easier ways you could have done that.
You
but-
got to sing for your lunch, I guess. I wanted, because I knew from the website that what was happening at the Danforth Center was that Danforth Center scientists were tackling some of the moonshots that I was interested in. And I didn't know any other place that I could go to see that kind of thing and to actually get a feel for the people. So that's been eye-opening. But the most important thing to me really was something I didn't expect, and that was I was just impressed by the questions they were asking. I mean, I talked to scientists yesterday who were involved with cowpea, cassava, and teff. Now, cowpea, cassava, and teff. There's some of you that maybe have never heard of any of those crops, or maybe 2 out of the 3 you haven't heard of. They're really important crops. And why would the Danforth Center choose those crops?
It's a great question.
They're African crops. I was so impressed by that choice because that's really where the bang for the buck is. I mean, if I wanted to place my bets on 3 crops, boy, those crops would be towards the top of the list. In terms of real impact for food security and nutrition and stopping this incredible problem of childhood stunting. I mean...
Those are the crops.
Yeah. And so to have a center here in St. Louis doing that, making that commitment long-term, that's what NOAA would be doing.
Yeah, those would be the crops.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Cary Fowler, this has been amazing to talk to you here. And just before we have Dr. Carrington come up and say a last word here, I just want to thank you so much for sharing with us and such thoughtful answers. So thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Oh, well, that was entertaining. I should mention, Cary was not paid for that hour-long advertisement for why the Danforth Center exists. I could not have imagined a better illustration through your experience, through your interests, in your career-long work that is a parallel example of addressing the grand challenges that the Danforth Center was created to address. We're not going to solve all of the problems in their entirety, not by a long shot. We need people like Cary. We need people like the networks that you've put together. And Cary's not the only one. There's others. This is a family. Cary, we're part of a family. That means more than you realize. We're a family in addressing these challenges of food security. Sarah, you asked, why do we work on these crops? Or who is working on these crops? I'm surprised some of our scientists who are in the audience didn't yell out when you asked those questions and said, "We are."
And Jim, can I add one thing in?
Please.
The work you're doing on root architecture and the connection between roots and crops is just astonishing. It's so important.
And I agree. And that work is using genetic diversity as the starting point for understanding what nature has given us, because that's the palette that we have to address food security through breeding and through bringing products to farmers. So I appreciate so much what you've talked about. Thinking long-term and having hope. I agree with you, Cary. I have hope, and there's reasons to have hope, and they start with people like you. They go to organizations like the Danforth Center that does this every day. I see the commitment to address these issues every day. And I'm hopeful because of all of you. You're here in support of what Cary Fowler has been talking about and in support of the Danforth Center. So I have hope.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for another wonderful program. You're one of our favorites. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Feel the same way.
Thank you, Cary, for making the trip up here and sharing your life's work and your passion and why we should all care. I also enjoyed hearing about your family. And thank you all for coming. I hope to see you again. I may be sitting in the back next time we have one of these, but I'll be here. Thank you for coming. Drive safely home.